before we go into our interview today, I wanted to let everyone know we have a new sponsor for our Energy Question podcast, the U.S. Oil and Gas Association, or USOGA for short. First established in 1917, USOGA has been an effective and creative voice for the industry for more than a century now. USOGA is dedicated to educating the public, policymakers, and legislators at the federal, state, and local levels about the value of the domestic oil and natural gas industry. If you're in the industry and not currently a USOGA member, please consider joining the association as a way of helping it tell your story to the policymakers whose actions impact everything you do each and every day. You can start that process by contacting USOGA through its website, usoga.org. Thanks so much to USOGA for sponsoring the Energy Question podcast. And now on with our show.
Hey, welcome to the Energy Question with David Blackmon. I'm your host, David Blackmon, and I have a very special guest today, Rick Perry, the longest serving governor of the state of Texas and former energy secretary. Governor, how are you today?
I'm great, other than, warm weather in August, but that's not extraordinary for Texas. We
certainly isn't.
But I'm blessed. I live halfway between Austin and Houston, right outside of a little town called Round Top.
Yeah.
And live on a piece of property with my two best friends from college. Actually, 51 years ago, we matriculated from the beloved Texas A&M, and we suspected we were all headed to Vietnam. They were both infantry officers in the Marine Corps. I was a wannabe pilot. And as fate would have it, none of us ended up in Vietnam, but we all went and served our country in some form or fashion. But we made a deal, David, that if when we got through doing whatever we were going to do in life, we would live in close proximity and run a beer and bait store. That was our aspiration as 22-year-old graduates of college, right? So anyway, we ended up here on 50 acres together. 45 or so years later, and it's been a dream come true. We see each other, we enjoy each other's company. And so, interestingly, I'm going to Vietnam the end of the month. So it's a bucket list for me that I suspected I would do 50 years ago, but I never did.
Well, so, thank goodness for that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going over to speak at a conference called Gas Tech in Singapore and share with them.
Right.
Yeah, it's a big national, actually international.
Yes, it is.
In Singapore. So I'm going to speak there, and I'm going to spend 4 days in Hanoi. There's an LNG import facility over there that I'm assisting with. So anyway, all kind of mixes together and keeps me in the energy realm. And, American liquefied natural gas, I suggest to you, is one of the most important products in the world, used properly. It is a compound for peace, prosperity, quality of life. And America has an extraordinarily abundant supply of it. And hopefully the future administrations will understand what a great gift this is. And we can help improve people's quality of life all around the globe.
It would be great if this administration were as focused on expanding our ability to produce and export LNG as it is on expanding renewable energy and electric vehicles, wouldn't it?
Well, listen, nobody worked any harder to get wind into the state of Texas than I did.
Yes.
Back in the early 2000s, as you'll recall, I want to say 03, 04 timeframe, natural gas was approaching $14 an MCF. I mean, incredibly high prices on gas. And we're kind of looking around at our alternatives. What's the alternative to this incredibly expensive natural gas? And so wind was one of the options that we looked at. At that particular point in time, it made some sense to have that alternative, additional option, and we subsidized the wind industry in Texas by building the CREZ lines from out in West Texas to where the population is. It's interesting. I tell people, if you want to understand Texas population, make a triangle from Dallas-Fort Worth down Interstate 35 to San Antonio, then go across to Houston on Interstate 10, and then turn north on Interstate 45 and go back to Dallas-Fort Worth. 85% of the population of the state of Texas is either inside or contiguous to that triangle. Really fascinating. It was one of the reasons that we talked about. It was ill-fated in its concept, the Trans-Texas Corridor, but in essence, it's happening to some degree with building the infrastructure, power, transportation, surface transportation, water, etc., in that triangle, and it makes a lot of sense. But my point is having that energy available. So back up to that wind side of thing, and we were able to bring the wind energy into the state of Texas. It made sense at that particular point in time. We can talk about what the repercussions of that has been, and I think not managed as well as it should have been managed, and we've gotten way too reliant upon these renewables. Back in February of 21, we saw the price that you pay for getting all of your eggs, or too many of your eggs, in one basket, so to speak. Right. But we'll talk about that here in a little bit as well. But the natural gas, and George Mitchell, I give George Mitchell great credit for literally changing the world. George Mitchell was a petroleum engineer from Texas A&M, I think class of 40. It was a Renaissance man. He redid the Strand down in Galveston. The Woodlands was one of his projects. This guy was just one of the more fascinating people that I met in my life. God rest his soul. He's gone on now, but his belief in the hydraulic fracturing of shale and the delivery of natural gas in the state of Texas, and particularly in the state of Texas, really changed the world. And so that availability of gas, the economic side of it, what are we, less than $3 an MCF now for gas, and extraordinarily abundant. We went from building import facilities along the Gulf Coast to export facilities along the Gulf Coast. During our time as with the Trump administration as the Secretary of Energy, we had we renamed the liquefied natural gas as Freedom Gas, and truly it was. If you look at it, we were bringing in gas along the North Shore of Poland, building a pipeline down across the Polish-Ukrainian border, and bringing gas to Europe that truly needs it. And now, 2+ years in hindsight, we warned the European community about Russia and Russia's intention to use energy as a weapon, and we were correct. And so,
yes, you were.
Around the world, people need to realize that if you care about the environment, if you care about the flourishing of mankind, fossil fuels have to be right at the epicenter of that, and particularly natural gas, of which the United States has probably, at this particular juncture, a 200-year supply of that.
Yes, at least. And that's probably a conservative estimate, I think. One of the things, and that brings me to one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today, because I've seen a couple of interviews you've done recently on both CNBC and Fox Business talking about the grid here in Texas. And The wind, of course, expanded greatly, once that renewable energy standard was put into place. And then, but more recently, we've had this vast expansion of solar. And so, we've had this spate of media reports here since we had a couple of days in June where ERCOT didn't know if we were going to have enough capacity to avoid some rolling blackouts. And the narrative out of that in the media, particularly the Texas media, has been that solar and batteries saved the day and that natural gas failed the grid somehow during those days. And I just wonder, and of course, we saw a similar narrative following Winter Storm Uri, when natural gas literally had to provide 75% of all the generation on the grid for a couple of days during the depths of that storm. But I just wonder what your view on all that is, as someone who, understands how this thing operates as well as anybody in the state, frankly.
Yeah. I think one of the hardest things to do as a human being is to admit when you've been wrong. And the narrative that comes all too often from our friends in the media is that fossil fuels are bad and renewables are the savior of all mankind, whether it's the environment, and the facts of the matter is we need a mix of our energy portfolio. That's one of the reasons, obviously, back in the early 2000s that we supported the expansion of wind energy, or bringing wind energy in the state of Texas. So we'd have a diverse portfolio, and that made a lot of sense. Do you need to find cleaner ways to use these energies? Absolutely. But when you look at the emissions in the United States since the 70s, we have driven emissions down substantially in the United States, and the bulk of that has been from some cleaner technologies that we use, but the transition from these older, inefficient coal burning plants to clean burning natural gas, that's where the real change happened. And that's not arguable.
No, it really isn't. Yeah.
Now back to this issue of why the media continues to have the narrative, and I think part of it goes to this mentality of gosh, we just hate to admit that we were wrong. That wind and solar is not the be all to end all. Nice to have a mix. Here's a staggering statistic. The end of this year, David, Texas will rely for its dispatchable energy portfolio, so to speak, 46% on renewables.
Yeah.
That is a stunning fact to me, that we've taken our eye off the ball. And listen, I understand, managing government's not easy.
No, it's not.
This is a difficult thing, and I understand it. I was there. I've had my ups and downs and back and forth. But the federal government, and it's another one of the reasons that we need to respect the 10th Amendment so much, and tell Washington, to go butt a stump from time to time that, frankly, we don't agree with you. And the 10th Amendment says that if it's not clearly delineated in the Constitution of the United States, then it's reserved for the states or the individuals to decide. So quit trying to make one size fits all, Washington, D.C., regardless of who the administration is. Washington all too often forces their policies on the rest of the country, and they just don't fit. Energy policy is a great example of it. We need to be left to our own devices. And what I mean by this is the subsidies that occur on the renewable side, way putting out of balance our portfolio of energy supply. Wind and solar have been given these subsidies that have made them frankly, I mean, I don't blame the businesses for going out and taking advantage of government subsidies, but
Yeah.
but the point is, it's really put our grid in jeopardy. You did a great report in talking about how close we were for the grid to have catastrophic failure back in February of 21. Had it not been for the natural gas plants that stayed up and were running when wind and solar were off, I mean, they were off. Had we not had those fossil fuel plants, we would have had a catastrophic, and I'm talking about potentially weeks, if not months, of no electricity across this state. Now, catastrophic is not even a good word to talk about what would that mean to this state. I mean, devastating. So how you have the balance, and I will suggest to you, if you're going to give incentives to the wind and the solar folks, why don't you give incentives to the fossil fuel folks as well?
Right.
You know, and I know there's some leaders in the state that understand that hopefully over the course of the coming years, we will have more balance out of Washington as well as out of Austin from the standpoint. One of the things I learned about governing is actually the concepts of governing are pretty simple. Don't overtax, don't overregulate, don't overlitigate, and have a skilled workforce. Skilled workforce basically translates into accountable public schools so that you've got the workforce that you need in your state. Those are the four things that the principles, if you'll put those into place and then try to stay out of the way, your state will do quite well. And so incentivize more of what you want, tax more of what you don't want. It's really pretty simple.
Exactly.
So this idea of giving some incentives to the fossil fuel industry makes a lot of sense to me. And you know, hopefully they'll figure it out. There's some really bright people at the PUC at ERCOT now, and
well, and they've already figured a lot of it out, haven't they? I mean, to their credit, the legislature, the governor, lieutenant governor, have really focused on reforming the system in a lot of ways and really resolving a lot of the problems that existed just 2 years ago, right?
If the federal government will just get out of their hair, which, I mean, that's kind of a pipe dream, I suppose, but the federal government, we need to push back on them as often as we can. You know, we got some great members of Congress. When I think about Chip Roy, when I think about Morgan Luttrell, I think about Wesley Hunt, August Pfluger, Dan Crenshaw, you know, our two senators, they get it about the 10th Amendment being important to the country and even more important to our states, and allowing the states to be the laboratories of innovation, if you will, and compete against each other. You know, if California wants to have, you know, high taxes, high regulation, high, you know, craziness level that they have, that's their choice. But then people get to decide where they want to live. And you know, as we're seeing people move out of California to other states, they at some point in time figure out, well, maybe overtaxing, overregulating, overlitigating, having bad public schools is not in our best interest.
Well, you talk about the federal government getting out of the way, and that's exactly what your administration, the Trump administration, did when you were energy secretary. That's what you did. We were almost completely energy independent during the Trump years, just 4 years ago. And today, of course, we've gone in completely the opposite direction. And I just wonder, how concerned are you about our country's energy security today and where it might be 5 years from now?
Well, we are I'm going to do something just a second. I'm seeing I'm getting a little bit more halo in there than I need. There we go.
There we go.
The sun is
it's moving.
That's not my angelic mode coming out. That's actually the sun moving through the side window here. This is an incredibly resilient country. And the oil and gas industry is an amazingly resilient industry. When you think about the ups and downs that we've had in the industry through the years, I mean, any wildcatter will tell you that, they've been broke and they've been rich. And they'll probably tell you rich is better. But we understand that. We've seen it. We know how to work our way through these cycles. And just as during the Trump administration, we went substantially with good expedition to being energy independent on no one.
Right.
We were independent of Saudi Arabia or Iran or Venezuela or any of the other oil and gas producing countries in the world. Now, we still did business with a number of them and still do, and that's okay. But I think we can recover with relative expedition these decisions that the Biden administration are going into. These executive orders, they only last as long as that president's there. And now with that said, we're spending a lot of money. And we all remember Solyndra and the tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars that got down that rat hole. We're seeing some of those again with this current administration. But I'm confident that with a new administration that understands the positive impact that American fossil fuels can have on the world, I highly recommend that your listeners, your viewers, read a book called Fossil Future.
Yes.
Alex Epstein.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I've probably got a copy of it here somewhere in my books. But this is one of the most thoughtful books that I've read in modern times about why fossil fuels are so important to the flourishing of mankind. We met 5 years ago at an energy conference over in South Africa, and I was just taken with his intellect. What a bright young man he is.
He's a brilliant guy, guy.
And he wrote, his initial book was The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. His second book, which came out a couple of years ago, Fossil Future. But the point he makes is that there are billions of people who have very few electrons of power to make their life better.
Yeah.
There are, probably close to 1 billion people that have zero, none. And you got to have a particularly dark heart to say to those people, we're sorry, we're living over here in our air conditioning and flying around in our jet airplanes and enjoying all of the benefits of fossil fuels and petroleum products, but we're not going to expand that to you. You don't deserve that. That is a heinous mindset, in my opinion. That verges on the same mindset as eugenics, if you will.
Yeah.
Getting rid of a population because you don't think the earth can handle it. Well, the earth can handle it. It's a resilient place. But anyway, read that book, Fossil Future, Alex Epstein, really bright young man. And it goes to the point of America is blessed with these natural resources. And we have I think we have a moral duty to be able to help people around the world, help people in this country, economically, health-wise, and fossil fuels can do that. Now, with all of that said, do we need to be using America's innovative capability? You know, you think about all the things that we have developed through the years, technology-wise. And one of the ones that I'm really focused on and that became front and center for me as the Secretary of Energy is our small modular reactors. And as another baseload supplier of electricity, and I might add, zero emissions. All of my environmental activist buddies out there, why don't we hear you talking about let's go spend these billions of dollars we're spending on battery technology or hydrogen technology or whatever on small modular reactors.
Right.
I mean, we're really close to making them be economically feasible if we're not already, and certainly feasible from the standpoint of delivering that base load of power. These are walk-away safe. I mean, there's a great education process that needs to go on because the environmental activists who I don't know what drives their mentality. Are they just anti capitalism? Are they anti-West? I don't get it. But when you are against something that is walk away safe, zero emissions, and you won't go support small modular reactors, there's something going on there that I can't put my finger on. I don't know what it is, but we need to blow by them and to educate the American public that, hey, listen, I'm a kid that grew up in the 50s and the 60s with the mushroom cloud and the atomic bomb and
duck and cover.
Then 3 Mile Island and Fukushima and Chernobyl, and we need to educate the public that that's not what these nuclear plants. You'll never have that type of issue. You don't have a waste issue with them. So all of that is part of an education process that needs to be going on. I wish they would teach that in our public schools as much as they're teaching that we're in an existential threat to mankind with using fossil fuels, which is an absolute fallacy, and frankly, brainwashing a generation of children. I think it's every bit as bad as the black-heartedness of those who would say, "Oh, sorry, if you're in Africa, you're just going to die. You're never going to have a sonogram. You're never going to have an incubator. You're just going to have to live by burning that cow dung or the wood that you can gather up and the particulate matter that you're going to suck into your lungs. Sorry, it's just the way it is, because we are morally advanced and we understand that fossil fuels are bad."
Right. Yeah, it is. It's tragic what's happening. And I agree with all of that. And I'm afraid these half hours go so fast, it boggles my mind. But we're running up against time here. I would love to.
Before we get out of here, David, I want to run one thing past on the environment that I hope your readers will go take a look at. And that was the eruption that happened in, I think, January of 22 in Tonga, right out it was an underground volcano.
Hunga Tonga Hunga volcano.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
And I want to say this thing was 10 times more powerful than the atomic bomb at Hiroshima. And so the amount of water vapor that just blew up into the stratosphere, which is 7 miles up in the air, 40 trillion gallons of water vapor. And water vapor, unlike a volcano land-based, blows particulate matter up in the air that shields the Earth from the sun's ray, and it causes global cooling. This event, which it's my understanding was one of the largest events in modern history, I'm talking about in literally thousands of years, that occurred. And that water vapor, the scientists have looked at it and they said, you know what, this is going to cause global warming, maybe raising temperatures globally 1.5 degrees centigrade. That's exactly what we're seeing
for a decade.
right now.
Yeah.
And so the idea so the idea that somehow fossil fuels is causing this, again, we need to educate the public about, you got to think pretty highly of yourself to think that human beings can have that big of effect on the climate. And take a look at what nature does, and then maybe you will come to the reality that fossil fuels are actually good for the world, good for the citizens, and good for the climate.
Yep. And for our ability to flourish as a society, as Alex writes in his book.
Indeed.
Well, thank you so much, Governor. I would love to do this again with you sometime soon.
I
Really
enjoyed it.
appreciate
Thank you,
your
David.
time. It's just an absolute pleasure, and appreciate your service to Texas and the country as well. Thank you for that.
Well, back at you. Thanks for educating the public out there. I think it's really important that if people want to know the truth, let them listen to David Blackmon.
There you go. Well, thanks to the U.S. Oil and Gas Association for sponsoring our podcast, to the Sansone Group for producing it, to our extraordinary producer, Eric Perel. I'm David Blackmon, and that's all for now.